Welcome, everyone, to the Hillary Raimo Show, Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio, dedicated to inspiring the human spirit and raising the collective vibration, one show at a time. My special guest tonight is Barbara Ann Clow, international Mayan elder, Cherokee record keeper, and internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher and author. Barbara has written 10 other books, including The Pleiadian Agenda, The Mind Chronicles, Charion, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, and Castrophobia. She also maintains an astrological website, handclow2012.com. Tonight we will be discussing her newest book, The Mayan Code, Time, Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. The Mayan Code is a deep exploration of how, as we approach the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012, time and consciousness are accelerating, giving us a new understanding of the universe. Using Carl Johan Calleman's research as well as the ideas of other Mayan calendar scholars, Barbara examines 16.4 billion years of evolution to decode the creative patterns of Earth and the world mind. The Mayan Code shows how the time cycles of the calendar match important periods in the evolutionary databanks of the Earth and the Milky Way Galaxy. These stages of evolution are converging during the final stage of the calendar, the period between 1999 and 2001. We are accepting your in-quick questions. If you would like, you may send them to me and we will answer them during the show. And if you have a question that's topic specific, you are welcome to call us at 602-412-4949. Again, that's topic specific. And before we begin, I'd also like to say a thank you to our show's sponsor, A Peaceful Place Massage and Wellness. For more information about A Peaceful Place, visit apeacefulplace.com. So without further delay, I would very much like to welcome Barbara Ann Clow. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, Hillary. How are you?
I am fabulous.
Good.
How are you?
I'm very good, as a matter of fact.
Wonderful. Well, I have been previewing this book, getting ready for our show, and I have to say it's absolutely incredible. And I don't even know where we should start. Where would you like to start with all of this?
Yeah, it's a huge topic, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah, I think the most important thing about this book is for us to start to recognize that we're actually in the middle of a very, very major time acceleration right now. And the only thing that was inaccurate in your description was it's 1999 through 2011, 2012, not 2001. But everything else was exactly right. And so I'm only saying that because we're in the middle right now of like a 12 to 13 year-long time acceleration where time is going 20 times faster than it was since 1755. And then time is going 20 times faster since 5,000 years ago as it has been since 1755. And so it's like we're in this point now where in terms of human consciousness and human evolution, we're kind of at the top of the spiral now. And I think many of us can feel that. I think that many of us are feeling levels of intensity and things coming at us from the past and from other places that we don't really understand. And so I had a wonderful time writing this book because it gave me a chance to kind of sort some of that stuff out.
You go into so much in this book, and it's so descriptive, and it's so in detailed, and it's probably one of the best books I've read on the Mayan calendar. And when you talk about time speeding up, how would you explain that to somebody that perhaps doesn't understand what you mean by acceleration? Yeah,
it would appear from an evolutionary point of view. First of all, we as humans are at the pinnacle of the evolutionary ladder on this planet. It's not that we're superior in any way to plants or animals, because we're certainly not. But evolution seems to be accelerating through humans. And then if you think about it, it's mainly through the development of our consciousness and of our minds. And so most people, if they go back to around 1998, 1999, they actually will recall, if they think about it, that actually things just suddenly went incredibly faster at that point than before. And that certainly happened to me in my life, and I couldn't imagine what was going on. And then I ran into the research of Carl Johan Calleman, who is the Swedish biologist who actually discovered the principle of time acceleration in the calendar. And so this was a really huge discovery for me for two reasons. First of all, I had been the Mayan calendar researcher most of my life, and especially the last 25, 30 years as a publisher. And so, needless to say, as we get closer and closer to the end of the calendar, we're all really working very, very hard to figure out what this calendar might mean. And so to finally get something that I feel is an answer that not only is probably the correct one, but also is an answer that can help us as a species overcome the tremendous blocks that we have right now. So that was one part of the excitement that I felt when I discovered Calleman's work. But then I also have my own research, and my own research has, the deepest level of my research has been involved with working with 9 dimensions of consciousness, and also working with trauma and what I call catastrophobia. One of my books is actually called Catastrophobia. And I have posited that we are a multi-traumatized species and that we're not accessing 9 dimensions because we are so blocked. And so Calleman's work was the one dimension I could never figure out. When this material came to me, the 9th dimension, which is the highest dimension in this system, is time. And then time codes go into the actual mind of God, and then the process of creation starts. But I couldn't understand how time could be a dimension or could be a high dimension like that was actually directing spiritual creation. And so when I discovered Calleman's work in 2004, 2005, this was kind of like the completion point for me of like basically 40 years of research. It was a really exciting culmination that, you kind of hope for that in your lifetime, but often it doesn't happen. So this book is really the fruit of that.
Yeah, is that what you mean by organic time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea because Calleman is an evolutionary biologist, and what he discovered in the calendar is that the Mayans actually had the time codes of the way evolution is actually functioning over 16.4 billion years. And then inherent in those time codes is this principle of these periods of time acceleration. And they actually are very organic because there's 9 of them. They're called 9 underworlds. And they actually, all 9 of them culminate in 2011, 2012 AD. So the first one, which is 16.4 billion years, culminates in 2011, 2012. Then the next one, which is 820 million years, culminates in 2011, 2012. So they're all going along simultaneously. And a lot of people really resonate with this idea. For example, I've noticed with young people, like people under 40, one of these underworlds, which was a fairly recent one, is 100,000 years long, and it's called the regional underworld. And it's kind of like the time of the Garden of Eden. And what's happening with that underworld is that desire to be at one with nature and to be really in tune with natural things is a very powerful force. And that underworld, that process, is going along simultaneously right now with the historical underworld, which is 5,000 years long. And then the next underworld after that is the industrialization underworld. And then now we're in the middle of the galactic underworld, in a time period in which we're actually becoming part of the galaxy. And people are really doing that. People are really showing a lot of evidence of orienting themselves now in the galaxy itself and not just in the solar system around the planet.
So when you talk about an underworld, could you describe that for perhaps somebody who doesn't understand that concept?
Yeah, it sounds like a funny word. One of the things I like about Carl Calleman is he uses Mayan terminology, which is one of the things that attracted me to his work. And so in the Popol Vuh and in the various Mayan sacred scripture, the time periods are called underworlds, so that's why he uses that. And then behind that is a very, very deep, rich idea that our planet itself has a structure, the whole planet, like from the core of the planet out to the surface of the planet. It has a whole structure of consciousness called the world tree. And so this sense of the underworld comes from this idea of this great tree of consciousness that's sourced in the underworld and then comes into our world, which is a very indigenous idea.
Now, how does that fit in with the idea of the 9 dimensions?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because that's where Carl and I kind of met each other, kind of like an X-cross in a way, because my own teaching has to do with the idea that we are capable of accessing 9 dimensions of consciousness at this moment. And that we're not only capable of that, but it would appear that is our evolutionary agenda. In other words, that's what we're all headed toward. And so when you're in touch with 9 dimensions of consciousness, you're in touch with, like, sacred geometry, you're in touch with sacred sound, you're in touch with the Creator. You can call the Creator God if you want to. We're in touch with the heart chakra and love, which happens to be the fifth dimension. The fourth dimension is the collective mind, the consciousness of the whole race, which is when we're kind of all tuned into each other. And so what I teach is techniques for being aware and active in all of those 9 dimensions simultaneously. But my dilemma was, as a teacher of this work, because this work first came to me from the Pleiadians when I channeled them in 1994 and 1995. In other words, this work came through me from another source, and then I started attempting to interpret it. And I didn't understand a lot of it when it first came in. But the piece that I didn't understand until a few years ago was the time codes. And you'd have to say, well, like, who cares? Well, number one, since we're coming to the end of this calendar and we're coming to the end of this particular process of time, people tend to be pretty tuned into it. But the other thing about it is I find that this idea of time acceleration and all of these underworlds stacked on top of each other and all coming to fruition simultaneously, I find that to be a very exciting idea. And so it is interesting that there's 9 underworlds and there's 9 dimensions. But they are they're different.
They are different.
Yeah, they are different.
And so if somebody, I mean, it's just very interesting how they're they seem to be going right along, and they're both, we're at a point collectively right now in this time frame where we're being asked to understand the 9 dimensions. And I have to say, Alchemy of the 9 Dimensions is one of my favorite books, and I highly recommend it to everybody. If you haven't already read it, or if you're not familiar, she also has a wonderful accompanying CD that goes along with it, which is fabulous for meditation. Barbara, I was looking through your book, and one of the things that I was really interested in, too, is the Christ consciousness that you talk about towards the end of the book.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And how does that fit in with the concepts of 9 underworlds?
Well, it's a really interesting question because, I've been a researcher my whole life, and I've been a great student, and I'm actually, even though I channeled one book, I'm actually quite logical. And I'm finding myself, as we get closer and closer to this so-called end point in the calendar and time, I'm finding myself becoming much, much more spiritual and actually much more conscious of Christ and also of God. And so when I ran into Calleman's work, there was when you start to study what this man is saying, and I feel like he should have the Nobel Peace Prize someday. What he's discovered is so phenomenal. You begin to get such an awestruck feeling of the complexity of creation and the plan in the consciousness of the creative being, whoever or whatever that is. You start to see the intricacy of this thing, and you could do this, also by just going out and looking at a sunflower for an hour or studying a seashell, and I do that too, if you know what I mean. But because this 9th dimension involves the actual working of the plan, and because, as far as I can tell, we are meant to be co-creators. In other words, the essence of this evolutionary idea is that we are meant to be co-creators with God, and that God isn't just doing this thing, and that furthermore, it's not going to happen unless we're co-creators. And so, having gone out and taught this material to a lot of people, I'm amazed at how excited they become by it, because for the first time, they see history making sense, they see modern culture making sense, they see politics making sense. They start to get an integration of what on earth is going on this planet. And this planet's a very confusing place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
When we come back from break, we'll be going to break in a couple minutes. When we come back, you do talk at length at some of the collective stuff that goes on and how we really have to re-question our history and where we come from and the fundamentalist aspect of where we come from in sense of creation. So after we go to break, maybe we can talk about that. But before we go, it was interesting how you started Chapter 8, The Christ in the Cosmos, by putting together quasi-codal and the 9 dimensions. And if you can say something about that quickly before we go to break, how does that concept of quasi-codal fit into the 9 dimensions? Yeah,
as a matter of fact, quite a few Mayan and Aztec people actually believe that Quetzalcoatl was a manifestation of Christ, but a manifestation in Mesoamerica. And there are quite a few people who believe that Christ actually turned up all over the place. And so Chapter 8 is all about that, because I actually think that's true. I think that He was a multi-dimensional being who could bilocate and trilocate practically all over the planet. And when he came into this field, he fundamentally altered the consciousness of our planet. So I had a lot of fun exploring that.
Yeah, and it sounds like shamanic work is very similar to that concept, too. Maybe we can touch base on that, too, because you do go into that concept as well in some of your book. And I think the listeners would be very interested to read that. So we're headed to break, and we're talking with Barbara Hand Clow, author, and we're discussing her book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. We'll be right back after this break.
Professionals recommend myofascial release for connective tissue conditions as well as chronic inflammatory disorders. Having been a New York State licensed massage therapist for over 15 years, Virginia Tui has had the experience to hone her skills and become an advanced therapist in myofascial release. For more information on how myofascial release can help you, visit our website at apeacefulplace.com.
Hello, I'm Hillary Raimo, host of Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio. I want to personally invite you to join me in Egypt for my Equinox Initiation Tour. Come with me and walk the sands of the ancient Egyptians, explore the temples of the mystery schools, celebrate the origins of life as we sail the Nile. Together we will reconnect to our true selves in the higher dimensions. Now more than ever, we are being asked to step up and take our power, to heal our wounds and discover our true essence as spiritual beings living a human experience. Travel with me to Egypt and reawaken to your true self. Give yourself the gift of something truly extraordinary. I personally invite you to walk the sands of our ancestors in a ceremonial and sacred way, surrounded by fellow kindred spirits from around the world on a once-in-a-lifetime journey. I truly hope you will consider joining me.
Brought to you by the Hillary Raimo Show, Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio, heard every Thursday, 8 to 9 p.m., right here on AchieveRadio.com. For more information on how to join Hillary on her Equinox Initiation Tour, please go to www.hillaryraimo.com or call 518-376-2503 for more information. 518-376-2503. Call today, 518-376-2503.
Time that is left. The Mayan calendar ends in 2011 through 2012, and many people think time will cease in 2012. Coming to the end of time is not about coming to the end of life, yet it surely means the end of gathering information about our story. I'm speaking with Barbara Hand Clow, author of The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. So here we are having to rethink our history and everything pretty much that we come from, Barbara, because if we're asked to begin to accept who we are and work with 9 dimensions and understand what the Mayans were trying to teach us, we really have to rethink our beginnings.
Yeah, that's true, and it's actually happening to us whether we realize it or not. Like one of the reasons that people are feeling so confused right now and kind of intense and kind of like everything is coming at you from every direction, that's happening because, in fact, it is. What has happened during the galactic underworld, the 1999 through 2011 time acceleration, is that because of a reorientation of our planet to the galaxy, we also are going through a reorientation within our inner brain. There's a lot of things changing regarding brain lateralization, which is right and left brain, and there's a lot of change going on, especially in the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And so what's happening is as you know from your own studies, time doesn't really exist in the first place. Time is just simply a creation form which has caused us to evolve through different levels. But in fact, the past, present, and future are simultaneous, which is, of course, an idea that people are finding very difficult to understand. So what's going on right now is that all those different evolutionary strains of each one of those 9 underworlds is actually starting to affect our consciousness. We can see it politically. We can see it right in our own communities, even, how quickly people are changing. And what we're moving into is actually being in a form of time that is no time. You know, the whole idea of the simultaneous now and being conscious in 9 dimensions. But it's just so intense right now. In many ways, we're at the last few years have been some of the most intense parts of this experience. But I have to tell you that, believe it or not, it's going to get even more intense. Like, according to the Mayan calendar, time is going to accelerate 20 times faster again in 2011 itself. Which is just... when you think of what it's been like since 1999, just in terms of global politics and the change on the planet, to think of it even going faster than that is just almost impossible to conceive of, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I'm interested to think, what are your thoughts on, perhaps, did they mean actual time, do you think, or psychological time?
Well, it's psychological time, really. Because in fact, as you know, time doesn't really exist. Time is a construct that's used to keep everything separate. Time is a method of keeping everything that's going on identifiable and separate, if you think about it. Like for example, the 6th underworld is called the national underworld, and it's the historical cycle. And so suddenly, around 3,115 or 116 BC, suddenly temple city cultures appeared: Mesoamerica and Egypt and China and Sumeria. And if you go back to your early history books or even archaeology books, the writer will say, it's weird, but suddenly this all appeared everywhere all at once. And that's the way time acceleration works. When the new evolutionary phase starts up, everything just shifts just like a lens in a movie camera, in a sense. And the reason this information is so important for us right now is that just happened to us in 1999. And most of us just can't figure it out. I mean, I provided an appendix in the book with a technique for people to process and take notes on what's been going on in their lives since 1999. Because, as a matter of fact, most of us, probably all of us, actually have been in the middle of a very unique creation since 1999. But it's going so fast we can't see the forest for the trees.
It's interesting because I'm friends with an astrologist, and she's been a guest on my show, and she was just talking a couple weeks ago about the solar eclipse that just happened on August 1st and how that was the end of an accumulation of a sun cycle that began in 99-2000. So when she was talking about that, she says people have to think back to what they were doing or what was going on in their lives at that time to see how it was coming up for them now. What do you think about the sun cycle aspect to that?
Well, first of all, regarding the other astrologer, I completely agree with her. And I think one of the things that is special about the Mayan Code is because I'm an astrologer, I also use astrology. So there's an appendix at the end of the book that correlates the astrology with the Mayan calendar and Carl Johan Calleman's analysis of it. And the reason that's so important is that the basic premise of astrology is that the planetary positions and signs and all that can be interpreted in order to understand human behavior, as you know. So if astrology is real and true, and I believe it is. I've been an astrologer for 40 years, and I can't imagine living without astrology. Oh, my God, you know. But if astrology really is true, then the astrology should show what the Mayan calendar says. And, in fact, it does. And so astrologers have just been going absolutely crazy since 1998-99 because the astrology is just on a phenomenal level that's beyond anything that any of us, have ever seen before. And in terms of the way that, like in 1999, grand squares and all that, and then the eclipses this summer were just unbelievable, the one on the 1st of August and then on the 16th of August. And so the Mayan calendar entered a very, very important change point August 15th this summer, and the eclipse is about 12 hours later, right on August 16th. And it took the power of that eclipse to bring the new level of consciousness to the human race, which has to do with world peace, by the way.
Mm.
So right now, the real issue, core issue this summer and this fall is achieving world peace. And sometimes it's hard for me to believe this stuff, okay? I mean, I'm pretty skeptical, okay? But what I was looking for was, would I be able to see significant things going on in June and July and August this summer that were a sign of real change? And there has been significant change in planetary politics, particularly during July. Very, very significant levels of change. On my website, I catalog that stuff. And normally when I do my website every month, I do a new moon analysis, and I do equinoxes and solstices. So normally I have about 5 or 6 or 7 newspaper clippings that I keep during the month to remind me, of what the important change points were. During the month of July, in order to do my new moon report, I had 60 news clippings on the floor that I had to sort out and work with to even be able to write the column. The amount of change that the world shifted so significantly during July in terms of tension between the East and the West, when suddenly the West caved in and agreed to talk to Iran and some of the different things that have been going on. And the situation in Georgia and Russia, these are very significant changes, and I think that the results are going to be quite positive.
And do you do private private sessions with people? Are you available
for that? No, I wish I could, but I just have so much research in writing the website, But speaking of politics, for instance, think of 1999 and remember Bosnia and Serbia and that horrible genocide. And a friend of mine, Georgia Kelly, the harpist, was actually in Bosnia when that whole thing happened. And she told me that you had a culture of people of different clans and different backgrounds who had been getting along just fine for a long, long time, and then suddenly it was somebody threw dynamite into the middle of it, And what happened just the last few weeks in Georgia, it could have been a bloodbath. But fortunately, the situation has been handled quite well, and not that many people have actually died in the middle of this. It could have been absolute ethnic cleansing and carnage for sure. So I saw that as possibly a positive sign.
Yeah, and I think this would be a great time to talk about what you mean by catastrophobia.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Okay. So Barbara Clow has been out there all these years as a teacher, teaching human potential and 9 dimensions of consciousness. And the big question for me as I was out there working with people was when I look at what we're capable of and when I see what people can do in their lives, and then when I see what's actually happening on the planet, there was a huge disparity, needless to say. So I started doing research with a couple of geologists from Oxford, because I'm not a scientist and I'm not a geologist. I need to work on that level. And the primary question in catastrophobia is, what do earth changes and climatic disorders and catastrophes on the planet, how do those things affect human consciousness? And the book covers the last 20,000 years, basically, but especially the last 11,500 years. And what I got into was the issue of a series of cataclysms that affected our solar system from about 14,000 years ago until about 11,500 years ago. And those catastrophes created problems with our consciousness, and then after the cataclysms were over, then we had 3,000 or 4,000 years of survival, up to maybe 4,000 BC. So what I was doing in that book was I was doing a deep exploration of what happened to us, because I feel that if we can understand what actually happened to us, I think we can start to heal ourselves. And what I found going to school and what I find in the scientific data that's given to us, it's not particularly accurate. And so I tried to straighten out a lot of things that seemed to be quite inaccurate in that book. You know, things like what's the real story with Atlantis and all that. I went after some of that.
Yeah, you did. And so for catastrophobia, is that basically then a psychological trauma that we experience on a collective level?
What it is, Hillary, is that catastrophobia is my own naming of a syndrome, which is fear of catastrophes. It's like any word you put phobia onto. And so I came to the conclusion that all of us deep inside somewhere have this kind of terror button, this kind of terrible fear of an impending disaster. And if you look at people and you watch them pretty closely, you can see that. And so back in those days, the book came out in 2001. I was mainly looking at the issue of people like the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, who think the world is coming to an end. And I never thought about this issue in terms of the Mayan calendar. But now what's going on, now that we're getting close to the end of the Mayan calendar, there's all kinds of people out there who are spreading all kinds of fear and terror and catastrophobia. And there's lots of people out there who are trying to make it look like the end of the Mayan calendar is the end of the planet X, Nibiru. You've heard some of this stuff. And in fact, as far as I can see, this is just plain inaccurate, and it's catastrophobia.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. One of somebody I work with says to me, actually, it was Marilyn Blackout, and she was on my show early on, and she said regarding the Mayan calendar, she says, well, there's a saying with my group of people that they ran out of paper or they ran out of rock to write on. And she kind of made it a joke, and of course it was funny, but it kind of puts it into perspective with the whole catastrophe aspect. I mean, if you look at what everybody was saying when we turned the year 2000 with Y2K and what's going to happen and everything's going to crash and it was just another day. So we really have to switch our thinking about how consciousness plays a role into all of this. You know, Barbara, I found really interesting the story of your grandfather's influence. And I was wondering if you'd be happy to share a little bit about what happened and how he taught you about the Pleiadian and the Orion connections.
When I was a little girl, I was born during World War II, and because of that, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents instead of my parents, which turned out to be very lucky for me, even though my parents were also really wonderful people. And my grandfather was half Cherokee and half Celtic, Scottish basically. And then my grandmother was from the Hebrides, so she was kind of Scots-Irish. And my grandmother believed in the fairies. When I was little, she taught me how to see them. In other words, the sight was never closed down in me, which I really appreciate a lot. And then my grandfather was a Cherokee record keeper, which means that he passed on the records of time. For instance, the Cherokee, we have remnants of the calendar. And my grandfather actually was the one who taught me all about the planetary Earth changes. And then when I went to school, none of the stuff they were teaching me in school fit with what my grandfather told me. And so I had a big struggle for a long time. And I discovered eventually that my grandfather's information was absolutely accurate, which is what catastrophobia is all about. So the Cherokee people, there's different kinds of teachers. There's medicine teachers, there's ceremonial teachers, there's record keepers. And that's my background with my grandfather. And I'm really lucky to have been taught that way as a child.
It's a great story, and I really enjoyed the part of, putting it into the book and writing it into the way that you wrote it. And we're going to go to break in a couple minutes again, another station break. But before we head in, I'd like to talk about the Pleiadian connection. I know you've done a lot of tremendous work, and when you talk about channeling, maybe you could touch base on the Pleiadian connection with the Mayan calendar.
Well, first of all, regarding the Pleiadian connection, many indigenous people believe that their home is the Pleiades. The Mayans believe this. I found the same thing in Indonesia. Certainly the Cherokee believe this. And so I was just simply taught that as a child, that my star home was in the Pleiades, and it was all very normal to me. And then growing up in American culture, I went through a whole series of experiences with that. You can imagine all the things I went through with that. And then finally in 1994, the Pleiadians just started coming through me. And I don't like to channel, by the way. Some people do like to channel, but I prefer to stay totally conscious. But I had to just give into it, so I surrendered to it, and I had a group of people questioning me, and then those sessions were taped. And the Pleiadian Agenda came through, and the Pleiadian Agenda is a wild and crazy channeled book. The main person speaking in the book is Satya, who's a Pleiadian goddess. She calls herself the teacher of goddess alchemy, and she's wonderful and bratty, and people are really fond of Satya. She's not me, by the way. But then the best part of my experience with the Pleiadian material is being as left-brain and research-oriented as I am, I wanted to understand what on earth this book meant, because the Pleiadian Agenda is actually quite scientific and it has 9 dimensions in it. It has a lot of information about sacred geometry and sound technology and stuff like that, and quantum mechanics and string theory, and all of it's in there. So I spent about 10 years researching my own channeled book. And then Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, which I know you like. What the Alchemy of 9 Dimensions basically does is it says the Pleiadian said blah, 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 and then this is what it means. And then I analyzed it scientifically.
Well,
and that was it actually turned out to be a wonderful way to integrate the right left brain issue, the right brain intuitive side, and then the left brain analytic side.
Well, hold that thought. I'd like to continue on with that when we get back from break. You're listening to the Hillary Raimo Show, Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Radio. For upcoming guests, you can visit my website, hillaryraimo.com. We're speaking with Barbara Han Clow, author of The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. We'll be right back.
Everyone needs a peaceful place to retreat to, a place to refresh your spirit, nourish your mind, and care for your body. That's what we do here at A Peaceful Place Massage and Wellness Center, located between Saratoga and Albany, New York. Let us help you achieve the healthy mind and body that you want and deserve. Go to apeacefulplace.com to learn how we can help you find your peaceful place.
Hello, I'm Hillary Raimo, host of Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio. I want to personally invite you to join me in Egypt for my Equinox Initiation Tour. Come with me and walk the sands of the ancient Egyptians, explore the temples of the mystery schools, celebrate the origins of life as we sail the Nile. Together we will reconnect to our true selves in the higher dimensions. Now, more than ever, we are being asked to step up and take our power, to heal our wounds and discover our true essence as spiritual beings living a human experience. Travel with me to Egypt and reawaken to your true self. Give yourself the gift of something truly extraordinary. I personally invite you to walk the sands of our ancestors in a ceremonial and sacred way, surrounded by fellow kindred spirits from around the world on a once-in-a-lifetime journey. I truly hope you will consider joining me.
Brought to you by the Hillary Raimo Show, Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio. Heard every Thursday, 8 to 9 p.m. right here on achieveradio.com. For more information on how to join Hillary on her Equinox Initiation Tour, please go to www.hillaryraimo.com or call 518-376-2503 for more information. 518-376-2503. Call today, 518-376-2503.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Hillary Raimo. Welcome to Matters for Mind, Body, and Spirit Talk Radio. For those of you just joining us, we are speaking with author Barbara Han Clow and discussing her newest book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration, and Awakening the World Mind. And before we went to break, we were talking about the Pleiadian Agenda and the channeled book that Barbara wrote. And I'd love to keep going with that discussion because I'm fascinated to know how the Pleiadian Agenda would work into the 9 dimensions and 9 underworlds.
You want me to go for it again?
Go for it.
Okay. So there I am from I channeled the Pleiadian Agenda in 1994. And then in 1995, I went out and started teaching Pleiadian Agenda activations. And the reason I did that is because whenever I publish a book, I always go out and teach it. But the problem I had, unlike all my other books, is when I went out to teach it, I was teaching material and I only understood about maybe 30 or 40% of it, something like that. And so the Pleiadians had given me two channeled diagrams for this information. One of them is a diagram of a person on a healing table, and it shows how the 9 dimensions affect that person's body. The other diagram is an actual schemata of those 9 dimensions and how they work progressively. And the Pleiadians, and they talked to me. So what they said was, they said, just stick with those two diagrams, don't change them, and everything will work out all right. So I started out doing workshops, sometimes with a couple hundred people, where I would have those two diagrams on the stage, one on each side of me. And I would just start teaching the material in those two diagrams. And in many cases, the students in the audience were teaching me. Like, because it had so much scientific material in it that turned out to be as the book got published, the material was in the book started getting verified scientifically. And so a lot of scientists and a lot of very deep meditators were coming to my workshops. And to tell you the truth, they were teaching all of us. The minute I found anybody in the room who understood something I didn't understand, I said, hey, wait a minute, tell us about it. In the middle of that process of teaching a couple of hundred workshops, I was also doing very heavy-duty research on all of the scientific aspects of the book. So, as I said to you before, by 2004, I understood 8 of the dimensions, but I didn't understand the 9th dimension, which the Pleiadians said is Tzolk'in. And Tzolk'in is the 260-day Mayan calendar. That's the day calendar. So I knew it was Tzolk'in. I know what Tzolk'in is, but, like, what on earth are they talking about? And then when I finally discovered Calleman's research, it was just like the most amazing awakening, because suddenly time became really, truly organic. I really began to see that everything that's happening to us is really exactly like being in the middle of a growth process that's not going to stop, and it's going to a very important completion point. So that's how they're all connected. In other words, 9 underworlds and 9 dimensions are not the same thing, because 9 dimensions has to do with the levels of consciousness that we can access, and then the 9 underworlds have to do with these 9 progressive levels of time acceleration.
We have a question from Tanya in Washington. Tanya asks, are the Pleiadians blue-aura'd people? What does their world look like? Some people say that it is made of crystal, and others talk about blue-green and a white-colored world. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen them a couple of times, and when I did, it was really quite astonishing, and they were like blue light forms. So most people who pick up on the Pleiadians one way or another start talking about blue. That's definitely their color. And then as far as the way they live is concerned, I've actually traveled there, kind of out-of-body traveling there, and they live in a very, very simple way. They live in a way that we may be headed to in the future possibly. Or another reason their life may be so simple is that sometimes I think the Pleiadians that their big cycle is the 100,000-year cycle. Earlier on in the show, I mentioned that the 5th underworld is called the regional underworld, and it's like Eden. And it's 100,000 years long, and this represents the development of Paleolithic culture. And I think the Pleiadian consciousness is very much, very, very Pleiadian, very, I want to say Paleolithic, very much in touch with nature, very much into oneness.
Well, that's a big question for us, isn't it, right now, is how to become more aware of our connectedness and the fact that we're all one. I'm also fascinated by the astrology that you had talked about at some point in the book about, I wish I had it marked right now, but the Mayan people had moved to a different location, and there was a central star. They were searching for a central star that was stationary in the sky. Forgive me for not having the exact passage right here, but they were concerned about finding that star, and you had talked about somehow how we face the galactic center. Mm-hmm. Could you describe what the galactic center is and how it's different from, I think you said, the Earth center?
Well, yeah, the center of our planet is an iron core crystal, which the Pleiadians said back in '94, and then that was later confirmed by science. So we do know that at this point. And we also at this point know that there is a black hole in the center of the Milky Way Galaxy. And black holes are actually kind of entities in space that have to do with the collapse of time. So I find it really interesting that there are black holes in the center of galaxies. And, of course, astronomers come up with this awful word, black hole. We probably come up with so much of a better word for it, but it represents the point where time collapses and goes through a tunnel and then emerges in an entirely new world. So there's a sense that the center of our galaxy is kind of an expression of what the end of the calendar could be like on some level. But the important thing about our galactic awakening right now is that our planet is in a very special alignment at the time, especially at the time of the winter solstice, with the galactic plane right now. And this is a fairly complicated astronomical topic. It's something you almost can't explain without looking at details, without looking at diagrams. But what's important is that we are in a position in the galaxy on our planet right now where we are being infused with very, very high energy galactic, even possibly gamma rays and different things like that. Our relationship to the galaxy is very, very special right now. And that seems to be the thing that is changing us the most as far as I can tell. And then, as you know, there is an issue of the sun. And right now, by the way, the sun has been very, very dormant since February. There have been almost basically there have been no solar flares at all since February. But pretty soon the sun is going to become quite active. And then we're going to have a lot of energy coming to us from the sun itself.
Do you think our consciousness goes through into that black hole when we pass on? Do you think we migrate towards the center?
I think our consciousness is connected with that black hole right now. When I've worked with Mayan people down in Guatemala and Mexico, we use a meditation technique where we travel from the Earth into the center of the sun. And then once we have moved our consciousness into the center of the sun, then we go into the center of the galaxy. And so anybody can do that right now. It's like this issue of extraterrestrials is always so interesting to me because there's nothing limiting us from going anywhere in our consciousness, to the Pleiades or Orion or Sirius or whatever we want to do. But the question would be, you could say, well, why does this matter? Well, apparently what's going on is the ninth dimension is located in the center of the Milky Way Galaxy. What's coming out of the center of the Milky Way is the time codes of the Mayan calendar.
Wow. So if we wanted to connect with that in meditation, then how would you, if somebody really didn't have much experience, you've had quite a bit of experience in doing this, how would you recommend somebody attempt to do that perhaps is a beginner?
Well, what I would say, Hillary, I know you're taking a group to Egypt, and I think that's so exciting because I used to take groups to Egypt too. And I think that teachers and students go to Egypt at a certain point when they're ready. And what goes on in Egypt is some of the master codes of consciousness on this planet are definitely in Egypt. And what happens is people go there, at the right moment. So first of all, I would say regarding this type of consciousness traveling, I actually think it's better to work with teachers and to work with groups. That's why we do Pleiadian Agenda activations, because in our activations, first of all, we've got Jerry, teaches my husband Jerry, and Jerry and I are helping people and we're leading them. But also we have one healer working with students for every 10 students all the way through these classes. And the reason for that is that when you start to awaken multidimensionality and you start to really get in touch with, say, sacred geometry, the platonic solids or whatever, crop circles, when you open those things, you go through all sorts of major changes in your emotional body and in your mental body. So that in our classes we have people constantly healing the students while they're doing this because it's so intense for them. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, boy, are books ever important. Because when you sit down with a really good book, you can go into a state of contemplation with that writer's mind, with that author's mind. And I think that people sometimes don't realize what they're really, really getting out of a really good book, because you have that chance to be, in the state of deepest contemplation with another person's mind. And that automatically starts taking you into other dimensions because you're in that consciousness of that person's world.
Would you recommend working in a meditation aspect with somebody else? Could you actually travel with somebody else to these places?
Well, first of all, a lot of people do it called in sessions, obviously. So I'm always sourcing my work deeply in the idea of a client and a healer. And that's why the Pleiadians show the person on a healing table when they're getting in touch with dimensions. So I would say that for people doing, almost any kind of therapy, whether it's past life regression or Reiki or just good body work or something like that, what's actually happening is that therapist is holding space for you so you can travel. But I don't want, this is advanced and tricky work. It's not something to play with, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean. You've got to be really respectful of it.
Barbara, we're coming to the end of our hour. It's gone by so fast.
Too bad.
I have to say, this was a power-packed show, and if everybody out there listening would like to listen to it again, which I highly suggest, the archive will be available on my Achieve Radio homepage, and you can download it in different formats for your convenience so that you can re-listen to it. Barbara, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you regarding your activations and your work?
Go to my website, handclow2012.com, and then what's on the website is any information about teaching and ordering books and stuff like that. They also can go to the bookstore, Amazon.com, obviously. But the other thing that's on the website is I do a free new moon and equinox and solstice analysis. So I do about 16 fairly long, 5-6 page analysis for free on the website. It's called AstroFlash. So the reason for AstroFlash is to update people on what's going on with the Mayan calendar in relationship to the astrological cycle.
Will you be having a trip around the 2011-2012 time? Do you still do trips?
I do. Like next year I'm teaching in Sweden. What Jerry and I have been concentrating on is one of the things coming through in Carl Calleman's theory is that there's an actual midline on the planet, which is 12 degrees east longitude. And I've been actually visiting places in Europe that are actually on that midline and have been working on that midline. So that's what I'm doing. Next year I'll be in Sweden. And then I'm teaching in the United States when I can.
And if people want to join you on that trip, how do they find out? On your website?
I don't take people on trips. In other words, I go to Sweden, and then the people over in Sweden plan the whole thing. But, of course, anybody who wants to can go to Sweden and go to the workshops, obviously. But it's all on it's all on the website. In other words, I used to take people to Egypt for like 2 weeks or something like that. But I'm not doing that type of work anymore because I'm just teaching as many activations as I can.
Yeah.
Activations are actually calling in 9 dimensions of consciousness in a certain location.
Well, I wish we had a whole other hour to talk about Egypt because you have a wonderful section in your book about the Great Pyramid, and it's just a fabulous, fabulous book filled with wonderful information. So I've been speaking with Barbara Hand Clow, author of The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and Awakening the World Mind. This show will be available on my archive page, and you can find out all the great things Barbara has to offer on her website, Handclow 2012. Barbara, thank you so much for joining me and my listeners tonight. Good night, everyone. I'll see you next week. Until next time, live well. Namaste.